Hi, everyone. So, last week we closed out the Romantic era. So, I hope everybody took the Romanticism exam and did all the work that was required for last week. This week we look at a new era, and that is the era known as Victorianism. And the reason it's called the Victorian era is because it basically covers the reign of Queen Victoria, who ascended to the throne at the age of 18 in 1837, and then who ruled for over 63 years up until her death in 1901. Now, that made her the longest reigning monarch in British history until Queen Queen Elizabeth II, the current Queen of England, passed her in September of 2015. So imagine during 63 years, a lot happens in the world. A lot of changes happen. England became an economic power. It became an imperial power. Excuse me. It became, basically, it grew under the reign of Victoria, and that power, even though it's been diminished slightly, still um, set the stage for current world events in world history. So, um, so I want you to look at the slideshow that introduces you to the Victorian age, and of course, your quiz is going to ask you some questions from that. You can use Google in conjunction with the slideshow if you need more information about things like, say, for example, the Great Exposition of 1851, something like that. Um, then the author we're going to look at this week is Alfred Lord Tennyson, probably one of the most important poets of the Victorian era. In fact, he became a celebrity in his lifetime. He was larger than life. He ended up becoming the poet laureate of England for several years because he was such a good poet. And what I really want you to look at this week, there are two poems that you'll be looking at closely. One of them is The Lady of Shalott, the other is Ulysses. Both of these poems are focused on stories that already existed long before Alfred Lord Tennyson started writing. So, Lady of Shalott's about this minor character, the Lady of Shalott, who is trapped in a tower and she's weaving and she can't go out and experience the real world. And then she sees Sir Lancelot ride by on a horse, and all of a sudden she falls in love. And all of a sudden, the innocence that she has is broken. So, there are several themes in that poem. Uh, the theme of artistry, the theme of isolation, the theme of the supernatural. So what is this curse that's supposed to happen to her? So for the paper, I want you to think about that theme of loss, of innocence. Or there's another question about it, which is how does this play as another take on the King Arthur story, which had been around for a good, you know, 700 or 800 years prior to Alfred Lord Tennyson writing The Lady of Shalott. So he took basically a minor character out of that and made a big poem out of it. Uh, the other poem, Ulysses, is kind of a sequel to the Odyssey, which is an ancient Greek tragedy about Ulysses, the hero, returning from the Trojan War. It takes him 20 years to get home. He gets home, and in this poem, it picks it up after he's been home for a little while. And his wife that he was so in love with is now 20 something years older, and she's showing her age. His son is now a full grown man. Um, he has lived a life of grand adventure for many years, and now he's sitting in a throne in his castle, basically acting as a judge. And he thinks that this is a boring life and that this is sad. And so he really wants to go back out on another grand adventure. And so he's recruiting some men, and he wants to go out, and he doesn't want to live in his home island of Ithaca anymore. He's ready to turn that island over to his son Telemachus and say, later, and peace out, and off he wants to go. So he gives a speech to his men. You can see this also as a dramatic monologue where he's having conversations with people, but we only get his side of the story. And so, um, you know, this is, kind of another take on the Odyssey, which had been around for a couple thousand years. So as you look at the discussion posting, it's going to ask you to look at uh, other takes on stories that had already existed. I give you a few examples. For example, Cruella from 101 Dalmatians, right? So Cruella is a movie starring Emma Stone. That's kind of an origin story of Cruella de Vil. Um, Cobra Kai. That is 30 years after the events of the Karate Kid movies, right? Just this past weekend, the Book of Boba Fett wrapped up and gave its season finale. That is a story of a character, Boba Fett, the bounty hunter, who tracks down Han Solo in The Empire Strikes Back, and focuses on what happened to him after he gets eaten by the Sarlacc monster in the movie The Return of the Jedi. So those are just some examples. So I want you to think about stories that were spawned or spun off, if you will, spun off from existing stories and have taken on a life of their own, like the examples I've given you. And there are plenty more examples you can choose from if you want to. So this week, the introduction to the Victorian age, a very, very important age, not only in British history, but in world history, and uh, Alfred Lord Tennyson and his additions to existing stories.